Hello and welcome to another episode of Tales from a Professional Nerd. My name is Bryan Steele, and I will be your nerd today and any other day that you watch one of my silly little shows. All right, so let's just go into the Week in Bryan. The Week in Bryan has been a good one, I would say. Um, Professionally, I have been diving in hard on some Warzone Eternal stuff. We recently have made an adjustment to some of the unit costs. From playtests and things have been reporting that there's some wiggle rooms on some of the new units. Oh, did I say new units? Some of the new stuff that's going to be in the Kickstarter. Obviously we're playtesting that stuff pretty heavy, and some of the responses have come back that there's excuse me, that there are some tweaks that needed to be done. So when we get back into revealing all that kind of stuff, expect some changes. Not massive or anything like that, but enough that it's requiring me to do a lot of document adjustments and stat block adjustments and weighing out of options and things before the next wave of playtest. So that's what I've been doing a lot of. Plus, getting myself doing a lot of research reading into an upcoming Shadowrun novel that I'm going to be working on. One of actually a couple there's a handful of Shadowrun novels coming in my future, and the one that I'm going to be gearing up here very soon, I'm actually really excited about because it is letting me dabble in an area that I have always wanted to be able to mess with and involve myself with when it comes to the overall Shadowrun Sixth World kind of motif. But it's not the kind of thing that I think most people would put in their game. I know I'm being vague, but it actually has something to do with the major meta plot for the Shadowrun Sixth World, so I can't talk about it because I don't want to spoil the awesome new stuff that's coming in next year. Yeah, so I'm just basically doing a lot of research reading, a lot of note taking, a lot of outlining, getting ready to start diving in on that. Waiting to hear back from some renegade management for my next Essence 20 project. Getting some painting done, which, by the way, if you could hear, I don't know if you can. My microphone is normally pretty good about cutting that kind of stuff out. My 3D printer is running, which means you might hear that kind of annoying in the background. That is my printer running to get me some more Warzone playtest models. So, sorry. Yeah, so professionally, it's been a good week. I also have, when this comes out, it'll have been live the night before, on one of my friends' Twitches. We are going to be doing some his homebrew campaign D&D. Live on Twitch. Hopefully it'll be a lot of fun. I'm playing a goblin pirate who buckles all the swashes. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I don't think I did anything. Oh, since last time we met, we ran for the Extra Life charity. We ran 24 hours straight through Nerd House Productions, and I ran my 5-hour chunk. Had an absolute blast. I ran a Power Rangers SS20 game, a convention scenario that I've run before, and a combination of technical difficulties, terrible dice, and getting started a little bit later. We actually had to cut a few scenes out and kind of fast forward the end to the big bad Megaform combat. Spoilers. But it was we had a blast. We had a ton of fun. We generated a bunch of money. Over the course of the 24 hours, we generated almost $4,000 for Extra Life charity. Um, if you get a chance to pop over to Nerd House, you should. They're go to Twitch, search them out on Nerd House, and they play a lot of games. They do a lot of streams. They are very very cool. And I do think I'm probably going to do some more stuff with them in the future when I get the opportunity and the spare time. When I get some more bandwidth, I think I will probably come over and guest run some games, maybe sit in as a player on a few, that kind of thing. Because they do good stuff, and I like to support good people. Let's see what else. Yeah, I think that's it. Been playing some video games. Personally, I'm back on the diet plan. I did not backslide as far as I thought I did, but I did backslide some weight. And I'm already starting to head back toward where I was. It's gonna be a battle, it always is. But I think that it's doing what it needs to do. I'm feeling better already, and it's just been a couple of days. So yeah, let's just say that's a journey that I'm pushing forward and hoping to happen. Gaming wise, I played in the Waking Realms D&D game last week, which is my buddy's homebrew D&D game where I am the Capoeira Cat Monk superhero. And it was the first time in a while that I've had an aquatic fight. We were fighting on a river, like we were on a boat fighting against this big shark thing. It went faster than I think he was intending it to. We kind of cleaned its clock. I'm assuming it is because it's because we didn't we may have expended a few more resources than we should have with some pretty big spells to take care of the monster. If it was not alone, we would have definitely had a hard time, and who knows what happens on our next encounter, because we will have spent some of our big stuff. But it was a fun session. It was a good session. I'm looking forward to the next one. Yeah, what else? I think that's really it, gaming-wise. I didn't do much gaming last week. This upcoming weekend, I'm meeting up with my Indianapolis friends, not to play D&D. We are gonna play a board game. I think we're playing the Star Trek Ascendancy game, either that or Twilight Imperium. Basically, we get together about once every other month or so and dedicate a day to one of those real big, long, drawn-out board games, and we get 6 or 7 people playing. Last time I played, if we are playing Star Trek Ascendancy, last time we played, I played Klingons and I ended up winning. I do love me some Klingons, but I will probably do maybe Romulans this time, depending on, whether or not, someone else, says, calls them. I wouldn't mind trying the Cardassians, but I'll probably, if only because to celebrate the Strange New Worlds first season, because of how rad everything was when it came to the dealing with the Romulans in the very first time, when their technology is new and the way that they look the first time you see them and go, whoa, they're kind of like Vulcans. I think that's probably what I'll do if I can. Someone else might already grab them, and I will report back with you guys and let you know how everything pans out. Aside from that, I think that's just about it. It's not I don't want to be like, it's a boring week, but it's been a lot of kind of a nose down, getting a bunch of work done, really kind of focused on forward progress on other things. But yeah, so that's it. Yeah, so let's go ahead and dive in. Let's dive in. Let's dive into the topic of the day. And the topic of the day actually comes from a comment from my buddy Dave. Um, from a handful of weeks ago, or actually, at this point, it's probably almost maybe a month or two ago, where he had said that he would love. I made a comment in one of my episodes where I had said that D&D Fourth Ed was not a bad system. It didn't fit to D&D very well, and it would have been much better for something like World of Warcraft or League of Legends or something along those lines. And he commented and said, "Do I think whether or not there are other systems that benefit better from having their own game system, or other settings that benefit from having their own game system, or settings that perhaps don't go well with a particular system?" And it got me thinking, and I put it on the back burner. And I started, kind of going forward and going, okay. And so I put this together, and I think I wanted to kind of just explain what I meant by that. And so for you would-be designers out there, or amateur designers, or full-on designers, if you're designing your designers, to kind of keep this kind of stuff in mind when you're making your own game system. Or if you're trying to adapt a particular license to your system, or whatever, or all of the above, is that there's different things that can kind of lend itself to certain atmospheres, if that makes any sense. So let's take the easy one. What I had meant about how D&D 4 didn't really feel good like with D&D, in my opinion, and seemingly a lot of opinions of other gamers out there. Some who are so hyperbolic about it, like, we don't even talk about D&D 4. That's not true. It was there. It had some good elements, but overall, it just didn't. It didn't seem to go well with the D&D feel. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that D&D had been going for so long, for such an unbelievably long time, that you had a certain kind of concept in mind. Is when D&D 4 came around with these, at-will powers, and once-a-scene powers, and once-a-day powers, and instead of keeping track of levels of like Fancy and Magic, and, there was some sticker shock. There was some, "Whoa, this is drastically different." And I think it worked a little better for Star Wars, because we all know that the Star Wars Saga Edition was basically, an unofficial beta test for D&D 4. I mean, like, it had a lot of the same stuff. It ran really similarly, used a lot of the same terminologies, came from the same company. I mean, like, I would have been surprised if someone was like, "No, those were totally different teams under different licenses." But what did happen is, I think that Star Wars lended itself a little better to that style of thing, because Star Wars is literally coming out of a cinematic structure. The stories that Star Wars tells are episodical. They are set up with normal acts and things, whereas a lot of D&D campaigns are plot driven, goal driven. Whether or not it takes 10 episodes to get there, or 5, is depending on how long you spend sandboxing, all that kind of thing. And when you're dealing with a more cinematic license, you can be a little more loose in how you handle things. So having someone, instead of having cantrips they can cast all the time, they've got once around powers, and then you do that same thing. Your once around powers, even for like fighters and barbarians, yeah, it's not really a power per se, but it's a new type of an attack. You're doing the same kind of thing when you have a standard action that you can spend to do this special thing once per turn. You're doing the same kind of thing, but just worded differently. And because everything fell into those broad categories of, you every round, once a scene, once a day. Since they were lopped into these kind of buckets. Well, here's this kind of push button do thing. Here's this kind of push button cool thing. It had a different take. It had a different feel. It almost felt like cooldown effects in a video game. Oh, I've used my this one, and I've got to wait for an hour or wait for a scene for it to come back online. It's not that different than what we do with D&D. I can only do this once per short rest or once per long rest or whatever. But because it is part of everything that comes back in a short rest or everything that comes back in a long rest, instead of you're literally waiting for a singular ability to come back online, to be available, it felt different. It felt strange. And I do think that if there was the ability to do like a World of Warcraft or a League of Legends or a Battle Royale or any kind of video game property where you've got these kinds of I've clicked on my power and I gotta wait for it to come back, but I've got these other powers that I can use in the interim, and I think D&D 4E would have fit really, really well with something like that. I think that the 4E system would have been, if it would have been a World of Warcraft game, license notwithstanding, I think that would have made a bazillion dollars. Because and frankly, it would have been really easy to figure out the design, because you could take a character and go, okay, what are their powers? How fast do they regenerate them? You would know which ones are the ones that I can use every round because it's the ones that if I click on a button, it comes back in a second. Which are the ones that I can only use once every scene? Well, that's the one that if I click, I've got to wait like a full minute worth of game time or whatever. There would have been things you could have absolutely done to just immediately almost just port that skin straight over, and then you just go do your thing. There are other systems that I think benefit their settings because they were designed specifically for that setting. Like they sat down and said, okay, what do we need this system to do? Because it needs to be able to tick off these boxes for our setting. Things like Cyberpunk Red, Shadowrun Sixth World. Those are proprietary style systems that they are designed for that. I wouldn't expect someone to try and run D&D using Shadowrun. I wouldn't expect someone to try and run a Shadowrun game with 5e rules. They just, some things just don't quite mesh, and as a designer, you have to decide: am I making this system specifically for a setting, or am I making a system that multiple settings can use with maybe a little bit of tweaking here and there, which is how we actually came up with the Essence 20. When Elisa and I and the rest of the team came up with Essence 20, we knew we were making a central game system. We wanted it to be cinematic. We wanted it to have kind of a looser feel, but have the ability to lean into the crunch based off of the licenses, and the licenses would bring their own coat of paint without changing the fundamental nature of the system itself. So that's how Essence 20 came around. Similarly speaking, things like Rifts. Rifts takes that to the extreme. It is or GURPS or Rifts. They take this system and go, you can play absolutely anything. You just got to wait for us to give you the exact rules to apply to it. And that's it. It's, you want to play Vampire? Play GURPS Vampire. You want to play super giant robot Mecha Robotech? You can do that with Rifts. There's all these sorts of things out there. Those systems, while they were designed for a specific setting, they're so big and so open that the company knew that they could add to whatever they wanted to. They could do any setting, any scenario. It would just take a designer time to adjust that main rule set for this to apply, which is how things came about with, like, if you're familiar with the Rift system, they've got two different types of damage capacity. They've got mega damage and standard damage, and for the longest time, standard damage was the only Rift's thing. It was just guys with swords and guns and whatever, and it was like hit points in D&D. You had standard damage, it did standard damage. And then when they kind of scaled it up to that next level, they were like, okay, the last thing we want is for somebody to be able to take out a giant mech robot with a survival knife if they sit there and poke at it long enough. Because that's kind of how D&D damage works. If you manage to cause 1 point of damage 1,000 times, down comes the Tarrasque. That was kind of the opposite thought with Rifts. They wanted things that were like, okay, here are things that cannot be damaged by smaller, little tiny weapons. Things like, you're not going to bring down an alien spacecraft with a pistol. And so they came up with this whole standard damage to mega damage thing, and I want to say it was like 100 mega damage or 100 standard damage per mega damage. So if you could manage to inflict 100 standard damage in one attack, you'd actually do 1 mega damage, and the only way to do that was like giant rockets and things, big rockets, big heavy weapons, anti-tank weapons. So it was still possible. But what ended up happening also is that it translated the opposite direction. So if you had a mega damage weapon, that it might only do 1d2 mega damage, but if it did 1 mega damage, it did 100 standard damage to something that was not a mega damage creature. And so what that does is that leads, as a system, yes, it totally works. It functions as far as the rules go, but you run into, now your system maybe can't have everybody play nice. That guy who really, really wants to play the low-tech barbarian in your game, the low-tech explorer, and you just can't figure out a way to, he's just a standard damage scientist or whatever. And then there's that other guy who goes, I want to play the super laser space knight, and his sword is on mega damage. Maybe his sword only does 1 mega damage. Like, on a mega damage scale, that's not that big of a deal. But it touches absolutely anything that's standard damage, and they go, and they pop. So that's where, you have to hopefully come into, as a game master, you got to step in and go, okay, here's the deal. Standard damage characters, let's try and leave you into that standard damage area, or give you some augmentation to make you into mega damage stuff, or vice versa. If you're going to play a campaign that's going to have a lot of standard damage stuff, maybe limit the number of people who can be mega damage things, or you make it very, very difficult for them to reload. Oh, jeez. That was weird. You make it very, very difficult for them to repair their stuff. The resources aren't there. Energize their batteries. Well, whatever. You make it work. And that's a strength of that particular type of system. And then you get into, there are systems that just simply could not work with anything else. Like I mentioned, Shadowrun. Shadowrun's awesome. It's got a very cool dice pool system. But if you wanted to, you could, just depending on how you choose. If you don't take a lot of cyberware, you do a lot of melee attacks, and you focus your skills on kind of survival and fighting and things like that. You could run a D&D game with in Shadowrun, almost like maybe like a middle, not a Middle Earth, but what is it called? Earth Dawn, which is basically fantasy Shadowrun. You could totally do it. It's just going to require you to do some changes and leave out some things and not allow certain things. But there are systems out there that just don't work with anything else. Now they're almost always going to be your kitsch systems, your like for instance the current Star Trek or the current Star Wars role playing game is made by Fantasy Flight, I believe, or maybe Atomic Mass Games at this point. But either way, it is filled with gimmicky dice. All of your classes are on specific cards that are very specific for that class, and you know you every product for that game has been built specifically for Star Wars. And if you're into that, if you're just like super dived in on the on that kind of Star Wars feel, that's going to work out for you. I personally think that that ends up being kind of a weakness to the system because you couldn't use it for anything else. But depending on the circumstance, you might not want to use it. You might not want to use it for anything else. Like this is all I do. This is what it's all about. And then there are like some independent games, things like 10 Candles, or which 10 Candles is a role playing game where you are playing these things, and there are literally 10 lit candles that when every time a big event happens or something moves that plot along, you snuff out one of the candles. It's a very like dreary experience. It's very like I don't want to say like emo and gothic, but it's got that very heavy feel. The game system Dread uses a Jenga tower to determine whether or not you succeed or fail, and it's based off of the tension involved, and it's supposed to be if it's a really, really difficult task, you've got to do one of the bottom ones, or like it's a very cool concept and a very interesting gimmick. But could you play D&D with using the Dread system? Not really, no. Could you play Vampire? Getting a little closer, but not really, because there's all the things with like hunger mechanics and stuff that's affecting you directly, and it's not all just storyline tension based. And that's, I think, where there are certain systems that really are designed for the game that they make, the setting that they make. Now, with something like Dread, you could make more settings, but they're almost all going to have that same feel. They're all going to have that weird tension factor that everyone's standing around a Jenga tower going, oh, is it successful? Is it not? It's going to fall down to that same concept of putting the pressure on the players through the story, and then let's go to the tower and see what happens. Like I said, I think those style games, I use the term gimmicky, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes the gimmick is very cool. Like, I actually think Dread is a really cool concept, but it's got to be used in a particular way. It is the game group's kind of responsibility to figure out what kind of game they want to play, what kind of setting it's going to be. I mean, obviously the game master's probably going to have done most of this work, but a lot of players, let's say the players don't like me personally. I don't care for the current I keep saying Star Trek, the current Star Wars role playing game. I don't like the mechanics. I'm not a big fan of the gimmicky dice. If I were to sit down and play that game, I have to, like, if I was invited and I was like, I want to spend time with my friends, I would need to get over myself and realize that I'm playing a game, and if it's really, really, really that taxing on my soul to play that game, then I humbly decline. But if it's not, if I want to have a good time, you look over the fact that this isn't a system for me, and you're enjoying time with your friends, you're enjoying the Star Wars setting. Push forward. Now, if someone invited me to their Star Wars game and then we get there and they go, oh, and by the way, this isn't Star Wars, this is uh, Brave Star, the old cartoon, like they would have to probably then spend an hour telling us about all the house rules and all the this is different and that is different, the Force doesn't exist and all that kind of stuff, which means that you're forcing that setting into a system that may or may not be good for it. Um, I guess I don't know. I guess long story short, yes, there are systems out there that I think lend themselves better to certain settings, and there are certain settings that I think need their own system or need someone to be able to modify it for a system. But I definitely do not think that there is a catch-all system for everything. Even things like GURPS and Rifts, they have their weaknesses. They have things that they do not play well. Um, and again, this is all my opinion. This is all just, over the last 30 years of gaming. Um, I've seen trends. I've seen, things. There could be groups out there like one of you guys could throw a comment in there and be like, I've been playing the same GURPS game for 15 years, and we've had just as many deep deep role playing moments than anybody at the anybody at a White Wolf vampire table could ever say that they've been through. Like that's totally possible, and each gaming group is different. I'm just saying, kind of as a generalization, there are certain systems that lend themselves better to certain things. Things like Hackmaster. We make the joke that about hack and slash. Hackmaster is basically D&D that added a little extra crunch to it. Games like Savage Worlds, they do a really good job of being able to apply to a lot of different scenarios, to a lot of different settings, but there are some limitations that they might have a hard time dealing with without having a fully dedicated, like, researched, in-depth source book. So that might be a system that I would avoid if I was trying to run that particular thing. A lot of times you can tell whether a setting is this modern in feel, is it sci-fi in feel, is it fantasy in feel, is it more theater of the mind, or is it going to require me to have a bunch of minis and terrain? These are the things that a system will sort of put up as their own pillars and tent poles, and then you have to decide whether or not your setting or your game or how you want to run your game or where you want to run your game, does it fit under those tent poles and pillars, or is it just going to be awkward and I need to find a different system to apply? And then for the designers out there, it comes down to how generic, are you trying to make a generic system that they can just use across the board? Or is this I want this to be a singular specific game, a singular specific setting. I'm pitching this setting to the client or the gaming group or whatever. Those are questions that a lot of times you've got to be able to answer, but they are answerable. And yeah, there's always exception to the rule, but overall they are still answerable. They are still something that you can do. You can find that square hole for your square peg. You don't have to try and jam it in and make it work some other way. A lot of game systems try to say that they are useful for everyone. We say that with Essence 20. We think that with the right kind of source book to add some flair and specifics, you could absolutely run anything with Essence 20. I'm sure there are people out there that are going to say, I don't think so, and that's possible. I just know that the way we designed it was hopefully to make a nice backbone to put any kind of cool, fun cinematic scenario or setting or scenario on top of it. And so far, it's done all right. Some things require a little more elbow grease than others, but overall, the system has shown that it works out well. Whereas I think D&D 5e a lot of people throw their setting into there because it's familiar, because it is something that a lot of people understand. You don't have to redesign the wheel. You don't have to tell people. You can say, hey, here's some new feats and some new powers and some new spells or new classes or whatever, but it's D&D. How many times have you heard somebody describe a game that says, well, it's like D&D but with guns, or it's like D&D but really steampunk. It's kind of like D&D 5e, but we're all dragons. Like there's a lot of that, and what that means is that D&D 5e as a system is a nice baseline. It's a nice flat open system that can be modified very easy. It's got a lot of cool moving parts, but it also sometimes means that people could be trying a little too hard to try and jam in. Well, here's my Star Trek 5e. Okay, Star Trek already has their own system. It's got the Modifius 2D20 system, which again, that's another perfect example. The Modifius 2D20 system is a lot like our Essence 20 system in the fact that it's a core. Once you know the core how to, it just comes to you as a player. If I know how 2D20 works, I need to pick up that rule book to know how 2D20 works slightly differently for Conan, or slightly differently for Dune, or slightly differently for Star Trek, or slightly differently for Fallout. That's the kind of same thing with Essence 20. Once you know the main system on how to read a character sheet, how to roll the dice, you know that each individual setting is going to apply its own stuff, and that's the new part you're going to need to learn. But overall, the actual system itself is going to be baseline, and you're going to totally get that. And that's something that game companies have been doing for a long time, is making that sort of base setup, GURPS, Rifts, Essence 20, and then you expand on it from there. So I know this has been me ranting and just kind of rolling through and giving a bunch of examples and kind of total stream of consciousness, but hopefully it was helpful. This is a short video today because I have an appointment that I've got to keep concerning my upcoming novel. I have a meeting that I need to get to, but I did want to make sure that I did cover this topic because it was a really good question, and I hope that maybe it'll spurn some more conversation, some more comments in the thread. Let's talk about this some more. Let's start some good conversations about different settings that you think would work with different systems, or different systems that you think could benefit certain settings. Maybe throw in some stuff that you've seen out in the universe that didn't work, or I played this one game. It was a proprietary system. It was specifically designed for this one setting, and it was terrible. I wish that we could do this game with this setting. Let's talk about it in the comments. Next week next week is going to actually be the Nerds Giving episode, where I wax poetic about all the stuff that I'm thankful for this last year, and hopefully the things that I am going to be thankful for in the year coming forward. So that should be a fun episode. And then after that, we get our next Q&A with a gamer. So next couple weeks are going to be pretty good for Tales from a Professional Nerd. And I really just want to make sure that everybody knows that have a good time, be safe. We're starting to get into the holidays. Realize a lot of people out there for this can be a tense, sensitive area. So make sure that you try and leave everybody a little happier than when you found them. Vaccinate, get boosters, wear a mask if you have to, and more than just about anything, play some games. I will see you next week.